So in Australia, we have an election coming up on the May 10th, 2022, and we don't have near as interesting competitors as France, meaning Melenchon, who is a socialist. He's got some interesting policies. There was one policy that I wasn't so sure of, but most of Melenchon's policies are quite interesting. I'm sure he's got some problems. I don't know really. I know very little about French politics, but I wanted to share something that Richard Medhurst, the journalist from the UK, said about Melenchon and the different policies that he has. And we certainly don't have anybody that is putting forth that kind of those kinds of positions here in Australia, as far as I know. The sad thing about the French elections is there really seems to be between a far-right candidate, Marie Le Pen, and a neoliberal, Macron. And so they have some differing policies, but really they're kind of xenophobic on Marie Le Pen's position, and she's against NATO, but that's about the most interesting thing, is that being against NATO. But I mean, it's not, there's more to imperialism than being against NATO. There's a lot of things going on there, and she is sort of Islamophobic, and that's sort of the bare minimum I know about her. But I think it would be a bit scary having her in office, as it is scary having Macron in office, because he's a neoliberal and he goes along with the US pretty much on everything. So, US imperialism. So anyway, here in Australia, I think I only know of one party that might be anti-imperialist, and that is the Australia Citizens Party. But I really don't know much about that party. I'm going to look into them. And I think I may have even looked at them at some point, and there was something about that party that I didn't like, and so I sort of didn't really go any further into it. But even the Greens here in Australia are problematic because they're not really anti-imperialist. They don't, most of them except for maybe one politician, don't support Assange, Julian Assange. They don't really have any sort of they don't really have any analysis of capitalism. They do the bare minimum on the environment, and sometimes their policies are ridiculous. Like sometimes their focus is ridiculous, meaning like here in Tasmania they wanted to get poker machines out of clubs. Well, that would be nice, except that there are so many other things that are problematic going on here in Tasmania, just as there's problematic things under capitalism going on in the rest of Australia. And there's no real sort of if there's no real analysis of capitalism and being against capitalism in a way, I don't see the point in it really myself. But anyway, and see none of these as far as I know. There's a number of parties in Australia, and none of them really I don't think are anti-capitalist, and if they are, I certainly haven't heard of them. And if you know of any that are, please put something in the comment section. That'd be great. But anyway, the different policies that Melenchon has, apparently the Socialist Party in France and the Communist Party, which only had like 1 or 2% of the vote, apparently are going to put their vote, because they didn't get really anywhere, they're going to go and give their preferences or something to Macron, which is so sad to be propping up a neoliberal like that. And what does that say about those two parties? And that's why I'm going to post something at the end of this, after this little segment on Melenchon by Richard Medhurst and his policies. I'm going to post something by Brian Becker from the Party for Socialism and Liberation. The Socialist Program is the name of the YouTube channel he has, and he talks about Marxist-Leninism, and putting it in real terms, socialism, helping people understand what socialism is, which is something I need to be able to do, and others also need to be able to do, so that we can basically smash the state. That's what we need to do, because as the saying goes by Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. And so, we're not going to be able to smash the state using all the different things that prop up the capitalist class and protect the property for the bourgeoisie. We're not going to be able to do anything with that. So it's going to have to be dismantled if we want to see the end of this shit show that we have happening here, that is basically has the foot on the necks of the working class, has a continuation of the colonialist policies in a way, and imperialist policies. So it's all bound together, and I'm not going to try and explain it. But Brian Becker, there's a little snippet of him talking about this, about Lenin's book, State and Revolution. It's only a few minutes long, and I invite you to check out his channel and to get more of an understanding of socialism. And I can probably put a couple of links to other channels that might also assist in this. So anyway, check out this next segment with Richard Medhurst and then following Brian Becker.
Now, if you look at Melenchon, oh man, I don't even know where to start. This guy is bringing the full package. Over here, Jean-Luc Melenchon. This guy, France is basically, it works on a system of republics, right? Over time, you've had governments that dissolved the French constitution and created a new republic, right? So right now, France is in its fifth republic. Ça s'appelle la Cinquième République. Mélenchon wants to abolish the constitution and form a sixth republic, right? Which again, there's nothing like, that might sound weird to you if you're not French. It's not that weird in France. Like I told you, they've done this 5 times already. So he wants to create a sixth republic. That means with a new constitution. And this is really incredible because he wants basically random citizens to be working in this assembly. And he wants, this is incredible. He wants French citizens to be able to suggest referendums instead of lawmakers suggesting referendums. Okay? So, I mean, that's really incredible. And not only that, basically he wants citizens to have the power to remove officials from office, right? So if you don't like someone, you can literally just vote them out, which is something the Yellow Vests wanted, by the way, right? Les Gilets jaunes. He wants to make voting mandatory, so you have to vote, but he also wants to recognize spoiled ballots, I guess you could say, or vote blanc, basically when you don't write in any candidate, right? He wants to recognize that so that it's actually factored in. He wants to lower the voting age to 16. And on top of that, he wants something, which I just told you, which is a referendum d'initiative citoyen, RIC. That's the thing where citizens can, they can suggest laws or abolish laws and remove people from office. It's called RIC. He wants, in terms of school education, free school books, free transport for students, free food and organic food. He wants students, I think it was €1,000 a month that you could get if you're a student, or up to 1,000. He also wants to implement mandatory civil service. So, countries like Austria have that. You can either, do the military for 9 months or, Zivildienst, which is basically civil service, which would be paid. And originally he wanted to abandon nuclear energy. He's by 2030, he's moved that to 2045. And his goal is to get to 100% renewables by 2050, specifically using wind. He wants to raise le SMIC to 1,400 euros. So that's basically, we're talking about the minimum wage. And he wants to make sure that you don't have these obnoxious ratios in companies where the CEO is making like 20 times more what like a new worker is making, or the guy at the bottom of the pyramid, right? Because that's usually what it is, not just in France, but in most of capitalist countries. The CEO is making like 20 times what the guy at the bottom is making, and he wants to abolish that. He wants to change the tax brackets as well, because right now you have six tax brackets. He wants them to be 14 tax brackets, so it's much more progressive, and it makes more sense. He wants to reduce the working week from 35 hours to 32 hours, specifically for things that involve manual labor. This is really important because, people take this for granted. Again, we learned this in school. The French really fought for this stuff. It's really the socialists who made sure you get paid vacation, paid leave. Your work hours per week are limited, right? You're not going to be worked to death. There's a retirement age. Like these are really fundamental things that a lot of people take for granted. And again, like I said, congé payé, paid leave. He wants to raise it from 5 to 6 weeks. So basically adding another week of vacation. That's not bad. And lower the age of retirement. Macron wants to raise it from 62 to 65, right? Which is ridiculous. And she was lambasting that. Le Pen says she wants to keep the 62-year-old threshold and bring it down to 60 for those who started working before age 20. Mélenchon wants to lower it from 62 to 60. He wants to hire 100,000 health workers, and he wants to again guarantee, that if you're born in France, you get the citizenship no matter where your parents come from, and he wants to quit NATO, right? So again, do you see the package? Like it's not comparable. You cannot compare Le Pen's program or platform, right? In French, it's a programme. You can't compare their platform, Macron and Le Pen, to what Melenchon is offering. It blows it out of the water. It's not even a question of like left or right. It's just way better. You read that and you see like this guy actually cares about French people, right? Instead of Macron who cares about bankers and Marine Le Pen, well, c'est Marine Le Pen, right? So unfortunately, he's out. He is out. And it's really sad. A lot of people are actually angry in France because you see the difference. It's 21.7 to 24. Let me show you again how Mélenchon has the correct positions. Here's a video where he's talking about Assange and Snowden. Let's take a look.
Vous êtes élu président, vous accordez l'asile à Julian Assange et Edward Snowden?
Évidemment. Non seulement je leur accorde l'asile.
So basically asked him, if you're elected president, would you give Assange and Snowden asylum? And he says, of course.
Et je les décore tous les deux. Parce que tous les deux ont aidé la France en dénonçant.
And he said he would even decorate them, right? Because they helped France in many ways. And he talks about Assange, some of the things that he did in terms of his leaks and so on. So I mean, you see the response. If you asked, I don't know, Emmanuel Macron, you asked Boris Johnson, they would rather jump out of the window than answer this question, right? Actually, they would never be asked that question because the reporters that interview them, don't do their jobs. But you see the difference, how he's correct on everything, almost everything, right? You don't have to love him, but this is the correct position to have on Assange and Snowden. I really fail to see what Marine Le Pen and Emmanuel Macron are offering. They're offering literally nothing. Nothing.
And what this book says, in short, is that the revolutionaries cannot take hold of the already existing state and use it for socialist purposes. And that, in fact, there's a big misconception about what the state is. We think of the state as frequently the two houses of Congress, the Supreme Court, the president. In other words, the governmental or bureaucratic apparatus. And there is an element of the state which is located there. But what Marx and Engels were saying, and what Lenin sort of rediscovers in Marxism, is that the essence of the state is not the government or the various forms of governmental rule. The essence of the state are the instruments of coercion and repression in society. He says the state is, in its essence, bodies of armed men, meaning it is the military, it is the cops, it's the courts, it's the prisons, and that the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, the supremacy of the bourgeoisie, ensconced in bourgeois laws that protect ultimately and always the rights of bourgeois private property against the interests and the democratic yearnings of the masses of people, that the state is really there always to defend and protect the interests of property. And in order to have a socialist transformation, the existing state can't be sort of taken hold of by, like, the socialists winning the majority in Congress or winning the presidency and using the existing state for revolutionary purposes. The state has to be smashed. It has to be destroyed. And a new state has to be created that reflects the revolutionary institutions, aspirations, values, and especially the public ownership of the means of production, the making private property public property, and reorganizing society fundamentally to meet the needs of the majority, meet the needs of the majority who are the working classes. And so it's extremely important polemic. You can read in chapter 1 of State and Revolution, he doesn't get to really finish his book because halfway through his writings, the revolution breaks out. So the State and Revolution isn't really the guide to what happens in 1917, which of course must be studied also, where there's first a popular anti-czarist revolution led by the reformists, led by the groups that are still like Kautsky, and then a second revolution led by Lenin and the poor. It's the poor, it's the poorest workers, it's the poorest peasants, like the poor in society take over. And when they do it, they smash the old state and they create a new state, and all of the old police and military forces that were, elemental to Tsarism and then the provisional revolutionary government are shifted, and a new state is created based on the needs of the people. And then when I go back to where and how the revolution spread to the east and to the south after 1917, and after Lenin comes to power and says, we support the anti-colonial movements. We want the anti-colonial movements to smash this state too. We want the true liberation of the colonies. And so in China, all the young Chinese are like, yeah, we want to do what Russia did. We want to learn from Lenin. And the same in Vietnam, and the same in Korea, and the same in Indonesia, all over in the anti-colonial struggles. And this book becomes, again, as I sort of said, sort of frivolously, it's like the Bible of the revolution that moved to the east and to the south. This book that says you can't take hold of the existing state machinery and turn it into an instrument for revolution. You have to smash it and destroy it. And so you see the armed struggles break out in China, in Korea, in Vietnam, in Indonesia, in India, etc. And the idea of Lenin, the ideas that are sort of reorganized and re-explain the core of Marxism in its revolutionary essence, then educates a whole new several generations, not one, but several generations of revolutionaries between 1918 all the way up until the collapse of the Soviet Union. This book is probably one of the most widely read books in the world during all those decades. The Communist Manifesto, Imperialism, the Highest Stage of Capitalism, and State and Revolution were the only competitor books were the Bible and the Quran in terms of how many people read them. These ideas shaped whole generations of revolutionaries and became their compass and their guide. If we don't have a clear understanding of where we're going and what we need to do, activism by itself is ultimately pretty meaningless. Ultimately, it doesn't transform society. There has to be consciousness and intentionality and direction. And when we read Marxism or Lenin's works or the other works of other revolutionaries, we recognize that these works are not doctrine that we just embrace unthinkingly. They are theory. And theory is nothing more than the generalized experience of earlier struggles of the oppressed against the oppressor. So all of the lessons that our class or the classes that are oppressed by the oppressors, their struggles over the centuries are crystallized in theory. So it's not an academic exercise. It's not interesting. It is, in fact, the generalized experience for revolution. And that was the core of who Lenin was and the core of this book and all of his other books.